Welcome to the TeenTix Arts Podcast, also known as TAP, a Seattle-based youth podcast that focuses on empowering youth voices through the exploration of art. Here on this podcast, we share our favorite artistic topics by exploring their histories and cultural impacts, but not by only offering our perspective as teens. We interview artists from emerging teen artists to ones well-established in their careers.
I'm Olivia, and today we're going to be discussing the past and present of an artistic and cultural movement that began here in the U.S. and has spread across the globe, and that is street art.
So what exactly is street art?
I think the easiest way to define street art is to talk about how it differs from public art. Obviously, disclaimer, people really disagree over terminology and definitions, especially with street art. But for the purposes of our conversation, public art is art that is being displayed in public and is approved of or commissioned by local governments or organizations. We're mostly going to be talking about visual art, but theater, music, other types of performance can also be public art. And then street art is also publicly available, but the key difference is that it's unsanctioned. So street art rejects the norms of the institutionalized art world and the economies of the art world, and it oftentimes has a political or social message, but it doesn't have to necessarily. So we're going to focus mostly on the street art scene that began in the late 1960s in New York and Philadelphia, where the form of street art was primarily graffiti, which is similar in style to most of the graffiti that we would see around cities today. But before we get into that, I'm going to define a few more terms that might come up. A small signature that's drawn really quickly in a stylized continuous line is called a tag. It's usually done with markers on mailboxes, signs, smaller scale things. But a tag can also refer to the name that a writer goes by, a writer being a graffiti writer. And they'll go by that in all their graffiti. And then a slightly bigger, more complicated design is called a throw-up or a throwy. And then the biggest thing you can do is a piece, which is short for masterpiece. It's a giant, intricately designed, very colorful mural, basically.
Why is street art done specifically on public property? Why not canvas?
I'm not a street artist, so I can't really speak from personal experience. And I'm guessing that a lot of different street artists have different motivations or opinions as to why it's done that way. But I do think that the fact that graffiti or street art is done in public places definitely changes how I interpret it and how I think about it. Sometimes the street art is explicitly questioning its own illegality or satirizing social norms. And so obviously if it was in a museum, it's not going to have the same message. Because an example of this is Banksy, who's a very famous street artist. Most people have probably heard of him, a British street artist. And one of his pieces that I really like is he's painted a graffiti remover in an orange vest who's ostensibly a city employee taking down graffiti. But the graffiti that they're taking down is a very recognizable, well-known cave painting, something that today we would value very highly. And he's kind of, likening graffiti to cave paintings, which I think is an interesting point. Of course, even when street art doesn't have an explicit social message like that, the fact that it was done at all is still some kind of statement about society. So the common graffiti-based street art that you'd see if you walked through Seattle or if you drive down I-5 and look off to the side, that kind of graffiti emerged around the late 1960s and into the 1970s as part of a broader hip-hop cultural wave.
What exactly is hip-hop culture?
So hip-hop culture is a movement that grew out of Black and brown urban communities, communities that are often undervalued and underinvested in. And it was just people who were looking for a way to be seen, be heard, express themselves, connect with each other. Other elements of hip-hop culture would be breakdancing, rap, DJing, etc., etc. So some of the first credited graffiti writers are Daryl McCrae, who is known by his tag Cornbread in Philadelphia, and Julio 204 and Talkie 183 in New York. An interesting fact I learned is that early tags in New York were usually a given name, Julio, and then a street or building number, which wasn't that didn't carry on, but I thought that was kind of an interesting little tidbit. So writers at this time mostly focused on painting walls or subway train cars was very common. Pieces could cover an entire car or even an entire train. crews developed, this like underground community really grew. And of course, at the same time, backlash towards graffiti also grew. It was scapegoated for lots of larger social problems, anti-graffiti laws, stuff we still see today. Of course, illegal graffiti writing continued, but then also writers started moving above ground. In 1973, an artistic collective in New York called the United Graffiti Artists held a gallery show, one of the first of like aerosol graffiti, and artists just started getting more attention from the like institutionalized art world throughout the 1970s. In 1979, Lee Quinones, who is a really prolific graffiti writer, did a show with Fab Five Freddy, another writer and general hip-hop icon, if you're familiar with hip-hop culture. They did a show together in Rome, and it really solidified the possibility that writers could be compensated and go global.
Why were they getting more attention? Was there a specific event that changed people's minds, or was there a shift in people's attention? Did they just become more accepting?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not totally sure, honestly. I can't think, or like I didn't find one specific event. I think there were a lot of little things, and it was like a gradual kind of acceptance. And of course, like it wasn't accepted entirely. A lot of like writers or people who started as graffiti writers and then became like more recognized artists still couldn't get their art in museums, like during their lifetimes at the very least. But I will say like yards, halls of fame, spaces that graffiti writers created where they could legally practice their art probably contributed to its acceptance a little bit more. And then there were also things like the movie Wild Style, which told the story of a young graffiti writer in New York, and it like captured hip-hop culture. So things like that took this underground community and amplified it and showed it to broader public probably helped. Press coverage too. I mean, I'm not totally sure is the short answer, but there's lots of different things you could point to. And of course, illegal graffiti writing kept going, and it still happens today. But the takeaway is that like the styles and practices of it have also been translated into more formal art spaces, so you can kind of see that evolution.
Who are some of the most significant people in street art?
This was very hard to narrow down because there are some really cool writers out there, people who are like still doing it to this day. One person I think is important to mention is Lady Pink. She's a writer who started in New York City, started writing in 1979 and kept painting trains until 1985.
What was her art style like?
Trains that she did were usually different versions of her tag, which was pink in block letters. One like train piece that I really liked was this like these two trains together that were like a Beatles fan art piece, and I loved that because I was like, she's so real for that. Like Beatles mania made it into graffiti. I loved seeing that. It was something she did with a writer called Is the Wiz, I should mention. The other thing that I really like about her art is her murals that are done on like walls. They're kind of more chaotic. They have lots of different characters and symbolism. She has this one mural I really like, and I think people should Google, called Pink Ghetto. Also very difficult to describe, but it's got like this like white 3D building on it that's, I think it's in the shape of a word or a tag, but like I honestly can't tell. There's this like pink city skyline behind it. There's like plants growing all over it, and there's like mini graffiti done on the building that it's like super meta. I think it's really cool. It kind of reminds me of like Salvador Dali, where you're like not really sure what you're looking at, and it's sort of like otherworldly. I really liked it. The other reason I wanted to mention her is because she's one of the first like female graffiti writers to really make a name for herself, and she definitely faced some like underestimation and like misogyny from a very male artistic space. And she still does art to this day, which I think is pretty cool. Another artist that I definitely want to talk about is Jean-Michel Basquiat. He grew up going to museums with his mom, and that definitely informed his art. Like he references a lot of other artists, both like contemporaries and historical artists in his art. He was also New York from Brooklyn. He started out doing graffiti with his friend Al Diaz, and they would tag things under the tag SAMO, which stands for like same old crap or same old shit, depending on your source. They did that around the late 70s. He eventually started selling like t-shirts and postcards of his work, but slowly like blew up and became a very famous artist. His work started showing at exhibitions. He became very wealthy, but he was also like heavily criticized by art critics. And like I mentioned before, he's one of those artists who, like, at the time, his work was rejected from museums, whereas today, you could definitely see them in museums. And he also just dealt with the realities of being a Black artist, which included this, like, whiplash of being treated in one way in spaces where, like, everyone knew who he was and he was famous, and so he got more respect. But, as an anonymous Black man in public, he had an entirely different experience. You can kind of see that in some of his art, and he produced a ton of work. If I was going to try to describe his art style, people say it's like neo-expressionism. I don't know what that means. A lot of his paintings are like very sketchy or like a collage, patchwork quality. They have little names and phrases sprinkled out oftentimes. And like I mentioned, his work deals with themes like racism, classism, religion, a lot of stuff. You can't really put him in a box, but he was mostly a painter. And when he died in 1988, he left like 600 paintings and like 1,000 drawings, so pretty crazy. And then last one that I'll mention for now is Keith Haring. I would say his work is like the most commercialized today out of all these artists. You've probably seen Keith Haring art on like a t-shirt or a tote bag somewhere. But when he started out, his work was always political. I heard that like when he, in his like Pennsylvania town he grew up in, he would like write stuff about Nixon in soap around his town. I was like, oh, he's so real for that. And then he moved to New York when he was 20, after he had his first gallery show. He was very influenced by like the 70s in New York, the clubbing, the craziness, all of that. And he was very inspired by graffiti writers around him. But he also didn't want to impose himself on it as an outsider, so he sort of had this other take on graffiti that I thought was kind of cool. He would do like chalk on subway ads, like blank subway ads, in order to like get his art out there publicly. And then he also like had many collaborators who were graffiti writers from New York, like LA2, also known as Angel Ortiz. He was a collaborator of Haring, and he was the one who like gave him credit to be tagging places that he wasn't from and wouldn't ordinarily have the street cred to tag. And he oftentimes is like forgotten when we talk about Keith Haring today, so I think he's important to mention for sure. If I were to describe Keith Haring's art style, it's like very pop art, very bright contrasting colors. He's known for having these like stock character icons that are like the barking dog, the crawling baby, etc., etc. And one of his most famous pieces is the Crack is Whack mural in New York. This was like at the height of the crack epidemic, and I think it's a really cool mural, and he obviously like he cared about the community that he was producing art in, and I think that's clear in his work. He also has the like ignorance equals fear piece that is talking about AIDS. And he just kind of got more notoriety and eventually opened the Pop Shop, which was actually quite controversial at the time. Some people felt like the fact that he was selling his art meant like he sold out, because then it's not really street art anymore if you're selling it. But he felt like it was an opportunity for normal people to be able to own a piece of his art rather than like only rich people at auctions raising their hands to buy his art. I'm curious though, Darya, how do you feel about like the prejudice against street art? Do you think that it's justified?
I think it's a very nuanced conversation to have, because I feel like the main reason that so much prejudice is held against street art is because of who's creating the street art. A lot of these artists are either really young or in marginalized communities, so often a lot of hatred towards this art is held because people just have this innate need to immediately criticize any marginalized art. And so I believe that's probably mostly where the prejudice comes from, is from who's creating. And I think what really ties the bow for people's hatred is the fact that it's also mostly done illegally, in the sense of it's being done on properties that other people own. But the thing about street art is it's not really physically harming anyone, and it doesn't really bother anyone because it's being done in places that no one's going to touch anyways, like walls and train cars. And so I think a lot of hatred is just from institutionalized racism in the art community, and so I personally believe that it's definitely unsanctioned.
When I think about public art in Pike Place Market. You could think about the gum wall. Like, technically, the gum wall is like an interactive piece of public art, but that doesn't mean I like it. So yeah, I highly recommend people walk around Seattle and just look around them more, because once you start noticing public art, you'll see it so much more. I mentioned like going down I-5. I've just started safely when I'm driving, started looking around more, and you can see some really cool art for free, which is the key, because oftentimes money is a barrier to seeing art, but the beauty of street art is that that is not the case. So highly recommend checking out the street art around Seattle. Next up, we're going to be talking to a local Seattle artist with a lot more firsthand experience of street art and hip-hop culture. To start, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and let us know what you do, where you're at, all that good stuff.
Yeah, my name is Idris Goodwin. I'm a professional theater artist, storyteller, father of two. I work at Seattle Children's Theater by day. I also put out lots of plays that are performed all over the country. I just released my first children's book last summer. I've got my first YA novel, King of the Neuroverse, that's coming out in October of this year. So yeah, I'm living. I won't say the dream just because, my dream is not to have a job. So I mean, I'm grateful to have a job by all means, but I'm doing what I've always knew I was put on this planet to do, which is tell stories, but also uplift other people's stories and encourage other people to tell their stories. In a way, I've become a bit of an evangelist for the amazing, very necessary powers of the act of storytelling and story sharing and story appreciation.
Mm. Um, well, congratulations on all that you got going on. I can see you're a very busy guy. One thing I wanted to say, I'm really excited to talk to you today. Part of the reason I heard about you is because I took a theater class at the University of Washington last quarter, and we read the play that you co-wrote with Kevin Koval, This is Modern
Mhm.
Art.
Yeah, yeah.
It was actually the first play we read, and
Nice.
it was really interesting to, discuss the themes of the play in my class, and then to
Yeah,
be talking to you now is so exciting. So on that topic, we're
yeah,
talking about street art today and
yeah.
kind of its origins in hip hop
Hmm.
culture.
Sure.
And I'd love to hear about how you were introduced to street art and hip hop culture yourself.
Cool. So I grew up in and around the Detroit area. I was born in 1977, and in the late and so this thing called rap music started invading the airwaves pretty much when I was a toddler. A song called Rapper's Delight comes out in 1979. So, and hip hop music, rap music is, it's on the lineage of, all forms of Black expression, which is like, neighborhood conversation, slang, parties, party dancing, party culture, because subcultures, cultures that are not necessarily being invited to go to the opera house or the clubs and all that stuff because these places are restricted or segregated or whatever, the venue for your self-expression becomes the places where they are safe for you to gather. So house parties, church, the corner. And so out of that, those environments, impact the style of art that you make, right? If you don't have access to an opera hall, or an orchestra hall with 40 other musicians, right? If you're just a DJ playing a house party, but you want to go farther than these records will allow you and this technology allows you, you start to get pretty creative and you want to this is where style and your individual voice come into play. So hip hop culture comes out of just people just like the proletariat, just people on the streets. And legend has it that, people writing on things is forever. Like that's just like you see that in cultures everywhere. Um, because because New York was sort of the entertainment capital, and it's so compressed, and you've got trains and you've got people living on top of each other, all of that expression becomes very quickly monetized. So bike messengers writing on things or tagging or trying to get their name in as many places as possible is being photographed heavily, and people are making documentaries that go on PBS, and this new style of dance, that people just call it, they come out of parties and street culture that they call rocking, get relabeled as breakdancing. And it ends up, and then they start, MTV is showing up, and suddenly, Herbie Hancock has a song called Rocket, which has scratches on it, which is a sound nobody had heard before. So with hip hop, you get this convergence of the beginning of the information age, the end of Jimmy Carter, and the beginning of this kind of trickle down kind of wealth disparity that we're still kind of in, to be honest with you. Like it really starts with Nixon. It starts with Nixon. We get an interruption with Gerald Ford and Carter. Then it's Reagan. And then out of Reagan, you get Bush. And then you get Bush too. The reaction to Bush is Clinton. And we're still dealing with this Bushes and Clintons and all this stuff, right? And Wall Street and that sort of thing. But out of that sort of get it however you got to get it coldness comes this different kind of Black expression that's different than Sly and the Family Stone, everybody just celebrate, right? And so in the midst of that, you've got the music, the rapping, the turntablism, you've got the dance, you've got the style, so clothing, you've got the photography, the document, all of that. And then you get graffiti, what they call graffiti or street art. I don't want to get into the politics of that. Some, street, so, but the thing is that if you watch there's a great documentary called Style Wars, right?
Yeah.
Style Wars is like 82, 83. It comes out, which means that much of what was being shot was like 1979, 80, 81. You see a bunch of graffiti artists in an art gallery. So there's always been there's always been that desire to make a buck off of street culture, urban culture. So, but for the sake of just clarity, like graffiti artists are the ones who are just, it is an internal conversation between graffiti artists with each other, who can get their name up, who's got the best style, all of that. Street art is what happens when one of these cats is like, you know what? I am tired of being chased out of places and putting my life, I want to get paid. So I'm going to move into this world, because graffiti is criminality, has this association with criminality. Street art is a little, yeah, okay. Street art is, we here at SCT in our lobby, we have a wonderful, huge mural, by a street artist, like someone who is paid to make murals, like, what I'm saying? So that would be the distinction. But street art, graffiti art, whatever, it's on the branch of the tree that we call hip hop. There's a lot of different opinions on it, but really I just really liken it to, it's sort of the contemporary, the information age, we'll call it, version of what humans have done since there have been humans, which is document their feelings and what they see in public places.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate you making that distinction. I think one of the things that I ran into when prepping for talking about street art in this episode, and I'm so new to learning about hip hop culture, it's not in my background, is there's so many different opinions on semantics and stuff and like what definitions there are of street art, and there are people who wouldn't even say that graffiti counts as art, which is something your play discusses, of course.
Oh, of course,
Which kind of leads me into one of the questions I wanted to ask, which is have you witnessed sort of a prejudice against a street art and hip hop culture? And if so, where do you think that is rooted in and where that comes from? I mean, you sort of addressed it already with this idea that it's coming from people who are denied resources, who are marginalized, oftentimes Black communities. But could you say a little bit more about that?
I listen, I think that, art is subjective. I think people show up for art and all for all different reasons. I think that at this point in time, we are in a post Banksy exit through the gift shop world.
Right.
So it's really not, I think most people kind of get it, especially if people who live in cities. Seattle has a ton of stuff on the walls, you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And the overpasses, right? I don't necessarily anymore think I mean, I think you can also tell, right? Like you can clearly tell what is intended. What is a person trying to make a statement? What
Mm-hmm.
is a person trying to amaze you and dazzle you with composition and color and all of that? What is a person making you go, whoa, how did they, so there's like graffiti as spectacle. There's
Mm-hmm.
graffiti as truly as like visual art, visual stimulation, or you can also tell when, like, the coffee shop paid an artist to paint,
Right, yeah.
there's advertising, right? And then there's like straight up graffiti, like, you know what I mean? Like, this is how I feel about Israel, or whatever. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so I think people kind of get the picture that
Yeah.
context is everything, you know.
Yeah, I hear that. One thing I really want to hear about, because I personally am a huge theater kid, and
Woo-hoo.
I love hearing that are you the creative director of Seattle Children's? That's your title?
Artistic director.
Artistic director of Seattle Children's
Yeah.
Theater.
Hmm.
How does your background with hip hop inform your work in theater?
Oh yeah. So I look at it this way. This is like a new kind of thing that I talk about all the time. So there's your there's your practice, there's your job, and there's your career.
Mm,
And your practice is something you do. It's something that came to you organically, and you sought to refine and improve, and it just kind of gets you through. It's the thing that you do to stay alive or to sustain your life. Your job is just, I need something to make some money, right?
mm,
Now, when you can find a job that aligns with your practice or draws from your practice, that's kind of a sweet thing. And then your career is like sort of the the accumulation of it's the journey of you as a professional,
mm.
and so you might have one job in your whole career. Most people have several jobs in their career,
Yeah.
and usually that career is related to your practice in some way, right? So for me, hip hop is my practice, and I include me as an educator in there as well. It's like my pedagogy, all of it is informed by just a lot of the sort of cultural tenets of hip hop culture, some of the ideas and contradictions and all that. But then I also, you know, found my voice through writing raps, like lyricism, and built my confidence in that way, and learned about performance in that way. Um, Playwriting and theater is a place where I found I could apply my practice. So I found jobs in theater, but my career overall is like more as a storyteller, because I'm also finding other jobs. As I for years I was a teaching artist using spoken word, and that comes from my rap practice, right?
Mm.
Now I had to adjust a little bit because I don't have a DJ with me and mics, and it's 9 o'clock in the morning and like whatever, right? So that's kind of how I look at it, is that, when I started really running around trying to make it happen in early 2000, there was not really, there wasn't a lot of lanes. If you were like, there weren't a lot of jobs for me, we'll say, as a
Mm.
rapper. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah,
I,
yeah,
I
yeah.
wasn't really interested in, all my heroes were like DIY, independent filmmakers, independent this, independent that. So when I started looking for jobs in the creative space, I was open to whatever I could find that aligned with my practice in any way, you know.
Mm. What is it like trying to to bring those practices into spaces that are sometimes I find quite like elitist or like inaccessible to some people. Like I feel like theater often it costs so much money sometimes to go see shows, and I mean that's part of why I like to work with TeenTix is because they try to make it more accessible. But have
Yeah.
you ever like experienced kind of resistance towards those practices in your work in this industry, I guess?
I mean, of course, listen, if you were in any field, really any field, you know, there is you're always dealing with supply and demand. You know what I mean? You're always dealing with you have a certain skill set, you have certain ideas, you have a certain way you want to do it, and then you hit this wall. You hit this limit of like, nope, okay, that's enough. Stay there, do this job that I've laid out for you. And then you want more, you want something different, and you try to move laterally or you try to move up and you hit a ceiling, and then after a while you get tired of that and you want something else. And so it's obviously, theater is theater as we know it. Well, let me back up.
Mm,
I'm personally, because I've been blessed to have a very diverse experience in this thing we call theater, right? Like,
right.
I started my own company when I was in Chicago. I've been a journeyman playwright, I've been in arts administration at theaters for the last like 7 years. So I've seen a lot of different ways people do it, but we're still pretty limited in our understanding or our imagination of how
Mm-hmm.
we can make theater necessary to people and a part of people's lives. So the 7:30 show, subscribers, seats that cost this much money, that's just like one way,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of different ways. And so what I would encourage, I mean, what I'm saying is that like rejection, limits, all of that, scarcity, that's just part of being a professional anything, like just,
Mm-hmm.
if you have any ambition or aspiration. Theater is tricky, not tricky, but it's like theaters facilities are pretty much designed for administrators and technicians, right?
Mm.
As far as creatives, artists, um, educators, those folks are hired in, they do a thing,
Yeah.
and then they go down the road. And there's pluses and minuses to that, you know. I'm the artistic director, but I spend a great deal of my time. I've gotten very good at spreadsheets. I've gotten very good at Excel. And I knew that. I knew that going into arts administration. I was like, I could either try to pursue an MBA or I could just go and have some on-the-job training. And so I don't know if I answered your question directly, but I guess what I will say is that just if again, if you have a practice that you care about and you make that decision that you want a job, you want to pursue jobs and build a career doing something related to your practice, you're going to always have to negotiate. You're going to have to always be in touch with yourself and what is your breaking point and how
Right.
bad do you want this thing? What's the negotiation? Because you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. And the
Mm.
negotiation is as much with before you have the negotiation with the company or whoever, you got to have a negotiation with yourself about what are we doing here? What is this about? How much of my practice do I want to commodify? Um, and how much of it needs to remain sacred and, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Switching gears a little bit. If you were to meet someone who's never heard about like hip hop in any form at all, they just, I don't know, lived on Mars before or whatever, how would you introduce them to hip hop? What would you like recommend to them, whether it be
Oh,
something that,
recommend. Okay.
yeah, like really connected with you, or has connected with you, like a street artist, a rapper, anything like that? Do you have any recommendations, I guess is my question?
Yeah. All right, so I would say your essential five is you got to watch the documentary Style Wars.
Mm,
You got to watch this other documentary called Freestyle,
mm,
Freestyle the Art of Rhyme. Now, not to be confused, there's another documentary called Art of Rhyme, and it was directed by Ice-T, the rapper. Not that one. There's a documentary before that called Freestyle Art of Rhyme.
okay.
Um, you would want to read Jeff Chang's book, Can't Stop, Won't Stop. Um, you would want to listen to Lauryn Hill's album,
Mm,
The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. And I'm making this all one line. Okay, this is putting three things in one. You want Lauryn Hill's Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. You want Erykah Badu's album Baduism, and you want the Roots album. Oh, this is a tough one. You want the Roots album, Things Fall Apart. Yeah, and then in the five spot, um, there's a podcast called What Had Happened Was, and it's interesting because it's hosted by a guy named Open Mike Eagle, and he interviews one artist for the whole 13 episodes or 10 episodes or however many, and he gets
mm,
so it's someone who's had like a storied career. And there's like four seasons of it, I want to say, and I would say there's one with a guy named Dante Ross. He was an A&R for hip hop music. So I would say that's the five pack that I think will get you pretty far.
all right. That's a good starter pack for sure.
Yeah.
One thing I just want to
Oh,
close
one
on.
honorable mention. Honorable
Yes.
mention. You wanna read Idris Goodwin's play How We Got On. Um,
All
or
right.
I have a collection of poems called Can I Kick It?
I love it.
Yeah.
Recommending me a podcast is really speaking my language. If you ask anyone in my life, they'll tell you how often I use the phrase "I just heard on a podcast,"
Yeah, yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. So I will definitely be checking some of that out. And Miseducation of Lauryn Hill is I love that album so
Yeah.
much.
No notes. No notes.
Yeah, for sure. Last thing I want to close on, I'm just curious if there is anything else you feel like we didn't cover that you would want someone to know about hip hop culture through your eyes, street art through your eyes, or just any general kind of misunderstanding or
I just want to really like stress that like there's a difference between products and people, and hip hop is part of a lineage um that is so distinctly American, and
mm,
it is through and but in hip hop, because it is the first form of music that is so referential, especially in the early phase of it. Now it's evolved and people are making a lot more sort of original sounds, or going back and sampling things from like the 90s, which is interesting. But if you look at rap's golden era, which there is no, I gotta be honest, this is controversial.
I love
Hip
a hot
hop,
take.
yeah, I'm gonna say it and I stand on it. Hip hop, the early 90s, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94 are the best to me, are the, if I have to pull one chunk out of this, 50-year thing called hip hop music, those handful of years to me are that's where it's at.
Mm,
And all of that contradiction, all of that complication, all of that fun and joy and fierceness and everything, that is not just like the hood or some microcosm, some little corner. It's like, no, that is the voice of America truly. And it may be speaking a language or slang or whatever that is distinctly of a certain region, but it is who we are as a nation. And as we are fighting yet again to figure out who the hell we want to be and who we are. And to me, hip hop more than any other genre of music, most accurately captures that honesty and that fight and that tension. It is like so id and ego in a battle all the time, like ambition and reality and like the streets and the palace and like all that stuff. I mean, Donald Trump has been on rap records before. Donald Trump's name was referenced a lot in the rap I was listening to in 80s and 90s. And it was because there was something about his sort of swag that rappers responded to. It's like, this is a guy who does his own thing. And now, flash forward, this person is running wild, but at the same time, you look at someone like Obama, like we don't get like Obama's whole rise was in the prime of like Jay-Z and Beyonce, like, so you don't get that. Bill Clinton, his big moment is playing saxophone on the Arsenio Hall show.
Mm.
Arsenio Hall was like like he was late night, but he was like bringing hip hop art. Like if you Google Arsenio Hall's closing show, his final performance, there's this huge cipher. Like all these rappers show up and send him off rhyming. And so I say this to say that like it's bigger than rap. It's bigger than like a cool rap song.
Hmm.
It's like this comes from somewhere. It's deeply rooted. It's If you go down the quote unquote rabbit hole of it, it will take you all the way back to the founding of the country. If you really think about it, if you really are ethnographic and anthropological, it's a window in. It was the internet before the internet. It was Wikipedia before Wikipedia. It was doing that. It was sampling things. It was referencing things. It was blending cultures. Like what Quentin Tarantino is doing as a filmmaker, rappers, hip hop artists were doing. You know. Last thing I forgot. One more thing I'm gonna put in the starter pack. This is it is definitely my favorite instrumental. It's my favorite beat.
Hmm.
It's a beautiful song, and the story behind the song is beautiful, tragic but beautiful. And the song is called Troy, or They Reminisce Over You, and it's by Pete Rock and CL Smooth. And I'm gonna end on that one.
All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you talking with us, and I encourage everyone to go check out Idris's work. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Would you like to start just by introducing yourself and sharing anything you'd like to about what you do as an artist?
Yeah. My name is Tassanee Hill. I'm 17 and I usually like to paint portraits. I just started painting, but yeah, I usually painted like yeah, I usually paint portraits, but I used to just like use pencils. I used to just like sketch a lot, but then my mom, she was like, you need to put this into a career. So now I'm painting. But yeah.
We love a supportive parent, a parent supporting the arts. Um, can I ask like what motivated you? Was it really just your mom who kind of pushed you to go into painting, or was there anything else that kind of motivated you to expand your artistic skill set?
Well, I've always been creative and I never really like in high school and like elementary, I've never really did very good with like that sort of environment. Like I just never really got like understood the way that other people understood like just other subjects. And I just always been like creative. I never really been good at like English and stuff. English is probably my worst, but
Fair
but
enough.
yeah.
Fair enough.
And
Cool.
I just like want it to be a career like really bad. So
That's awesome. I love
Yeah.
to hear that you're ambitious. Can you tell me a little bit about like how you came to be involved with Urban Artworks in particular, and maybe a little bit about what Urban Artworks is for people who don't know?
Urban Artworks is it's like an art program for youth, and it's free, and we all get paid. All the youth gets paid a stipend at the end of it, so it's like a paid program, and we like paint murals around Seattle.
Can you tell us how you got involved with Urban Artworks?
Yeah, so my mom actually, she just like, I don't know how she found it, but she told me she randomly signed me up for something. And usually I get so mad because like my mom, like, I don't know if you've been through this, but you're just when your parents just sign you up in something so random and you're just like, I don't want to do this. Like that's how I felt at first. Like I was like, I am not gonna do this. Like I'm not showing up. But then after a while, like I showed up and it was fun. Like my experience, 10 out of 10. Actually, 9 out of 10. Like it's great,
Oh,
but I just didn't really like, I just wasn't making friends. Like I'm not really that type of person, but it's still good. Like I had a lot of fun. And I did not know how to paint murals at first. Like I had no idea how to do anything. But then it's not that hard. Like it looks so hard, but it's really not that hard. Once you like actually get the hang of like angles and like how it's gonna like look on the wall, it's pretty easy. And yeah, like I could say like the community is really good. Like everybody is positive. Nobody there is has any negative vibes.
yeah, that's really, I feel like mural painting, it must be a very different like artistic experience than like when you're sketching or doing like portraits on your own, since it's
Yeah.
so collaborative. Could you talk a little bit about like challenges or like benefits from working within like a group to make such a big piece of art?
Yeah. So the good things about it is like it gets done faster. There's all like the other good thing is like there's other people like you may think like, oh, I might mess this up, but there's other people that are really good. Like so it's not really that bad. Like when you think of like a community mural, it's like, oh, like how are they gonna put all their styles together? But once it's done, it's like it makes sense. But a bad thing I could say is like the ideas, like when we're making up ideas, it's kind of hard because like I'm not saying people have bad ideas, but like sometimes it just doesn't make sense. And like you can't really say no because it's a community effort. So like you can't just say no, I don't really want that to be in there. So
Right.
you just gotta let it be there. But it still turns out good at the end of the day.
You kind of
If
have to
you
like
have
make compromises and like work
yeah.
on like getting everyone's ideas to work together. I could see how that would be difficult
Yeah.
for sure.
It's kind of stressful because it's like when you are doing like a community mural, like you want to focus on just your part, but then like you start to get in your head and you're like, what if they're not doing it right? Or like, what if they got the wrong color? What if they're not like blending it the same way as I'm blending it? Like sometimes it gets like you start to get in your head, but then honestly, at the end of the day, you just gotta like, I just have to remind myself like this is a community effort for a reason. Like everybody has their own style and that's okay. And it's not going to turn out like exactly how we pictured it.
Mm.
And that's like the best part of it because it shows personality.
I love that. Yeah, that's very true. Um, One of the things that we were talking about, like in our episode, because our episode is sort of about like street art and public art and like the differences between them and graffiti and all these different kinds of art that you wouldn't see in a museum. And one thing I'm curious about asking your opinion about is like what makes public art or like community murals different from art that you'd see in a museum? Like, do you feel like people interpret it differently because of the fact that it's not in a museum, or maybe I don't know, like view it differently somehow? How do you kind of think about those different spaces for art?
Honestly, I don't know. Let me think about this because like I feel like inside of like museums, people see it as it should be kept clean and all that. But then once they see a mural, like, or like quote unquote street art, it's like not, it shouldn't be kept clean. It shouldn't be like, it doesn't matter if they put something on it and stuff. Like, I feel like people treat it differently, but me personally, I think it's just like now people are starting to appreciate it, but like earlier people were just like, because if you really think about it, you're driving in your car, there's a big mural, you don't really stop and look, and you're like, wow, you know. But now people probably do now. Earlier, people didn't really care, you know, as much. Yeah, I think it does have like a different type of feeling towards it, because like for example, like graffiti, like people are gonna think that's just ew, like ugh, why is this here, like it's making the city ugly. But then like there would be in a museum, there's graffiti, there can be graffiti in on like a canvas, right?
Yeah.
Like if someone does like graffiti on a canvas, it's like, oh, that's so cool. But I feel like it is kind of getting, that type of is like kind of going away, because street art is starting to become like more nice and cool and chic and
Yeah.
trendy.
No, I hear that. I feel like I've kind of seen that like growth too.
Yeah.
And I also, one of the things that you mentioned that kind of made me think about the fact of like, oh, we drive by like, I don't know, like a huge mural or something every day, and sometimes we don't even stop and think about the like pieces of art around
Yeah.
us. And one thing that I found while like working on this podcast episode is like I've just been noticing art so much more because I'm
Yeah.
thinking about it. Like it's constantly around us, and once you like have
Exactly.
the mindset, I think a cool thing about publicly available art is it like it kind of makes you more mindful of like what's around
Exactly.
you,
Yeah.
which I think is
You don't have
cool.
to pay $50 to see someone's art. I get it, because artists need to get their money. But like I feel like street art, it's really different because I don't have to like be in this quiet space to view somebody's art, you know. I can literally walk outside my house and see that somebody decided to paint a mural on a
Yeah.
building.
I wonder if there's like a particular mural or maybe a portrait that you've done or sketch that you've really enjoyed doing, or was maybe had like a particular challenge that you had to deal with. Does anything come to mind?
I think one of the hardest was the first mural that I've done with Urban
Yeah.
Artworks. It was like this Martin Luther King mural. I don't know if I have a photo of it, probably on Urban Artworks Instagram, but it was like this Martin Luther King mural. And I feel like the hardest thing about it was this, there was just this one person that didn't really know what they were doing. They kept asking me like, oh, can you fix this face? Can you fix this one? And like, it was like my first time doing it. So I didn't really know what I was doing. It was just stressful.
That makes
Like
sense.
making up ideas, and they all had to be different. Like all the faces had to be different. And we weren't going off of any, there was no
Oh, yeah.
reference. We're like, okay, let's do MLK. Let's just put a bunch of people in the background. That was probably my most challenging mural that I've done.
I feel like it would be intimidating too, knowing that everyone who walks by this is gonna see it.
Yeah.
Like it's permanently gonna be there.
Yeah.
Especially when it's not something you've done before. Another question I wanted to ask was, are there any professional artists or art pieces that you really love?
Honestly, not really. This is gonna sound pretty bad coming from an artist, but like I don't really study art. I just do it.
Fair enough.
Like I don't really, like I appreciate artists around me, but I don't really look it up. And I need to start doing that because I'm about to go to college and I want to study art. But I don't really have favorite artists. I guess it's me.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Just had a couple more questions I wanted to ask. I'm wondering what advice you would have for other teens who might be interested in mural painting. I feel like it's kind of a difficult art form to get into because there's so much like permission involved and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So what advice would you have for someone who maybe wants to try doing something like that but doesn't know where to start?
Don't think about it too much. Like mural wise, like not really like the asking people for permission, but like mural wise, if you think about it too much, the proportions will be off. There's also like a method that you could do, like, you know, when you look at a mural and you're like, how did they make it look good but it's like huge, you know, like how are the proportions not like weird? There's like this method, and it's kind of like without using a projector, and basically you can just sketch whatever you want, like just paint smiley faces or something. When you sketch the smiley faces, each smiley face, like when you're actually sketching the bigger thing that you want to put on the wall, you can use the smiley faces to see like where to put the line. So like if it's like, oh, I'm gonna put this one line at the frowny face and the other line at the smiley face. I don't know how to explain it, but it's pretty cool. But I forgot like what it's actually called. But that's a good method you could use. But I don't really do that. I just do whatever until it starts to look right.
A consistent theme I've noticed in your answers is you kind of have to like let go of perfectionism a little bit when you're working with like so many people, and when you're working on a mural, you kind of have to like go with the flow a little bit.
Yeah. You have to, and honestly, you have to step back. Like if you don't step back, you're gonna start doing stuff too small, and you're gonna like realize like, oh, this is looking a little off. But yeah, you have to step back like a lot and just like take in what you did. Because if you don't, it's going to look weird if you just don't look at it.
I feel like that's such good advice for mural painting, but it's also just life advice, man. Like sometimes you gotta step back and appreciate your work.
Sometimes I get like annoyed and I'm like, why is this not looking like how I want it to look? But it's because I didn't step back and look at it. Because murals, it's like everything is bigger. So you're trying to blend this little thing and you're not realizing that like this is literally a tiny dot inside of your painting. Like you don't have to like make everything look super blended, because if you really like, for example, like if you're just driving past it, you're not gonna see the details. You're gonna see like the big parts of it, like what makes it look real.
Well, the last thing I just wanted to ask is if there's like anything else we didn't cover that you want to share about yourself as an artist, about Urban Artworks as an organization, or anything about, you know, public art, street art, in general.
I think another thing I could say is like when I first started with Urban Artworks, I did not want to go to it. I did start to learn how to give myself self-discipline. I would not show up and I remember because I didn't show up, I couldn't paint. And so a lot of the times I would get mad because a part of my painting, or a part of the like community painting, a part of my like part would like get covered, and I would like be upset. But then I had to like realize that this is my fault. Like I decided that I did not want to show up and I didn't want to paint. So that's just like the consequences of my own actions. But then eventually I started to show up and started to be happy like with the outcome of me showing up.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Well, is there anything else you want to share?
Not really.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for talking to us and for sharing with us about Urban Artworks. I do have to say, living in the U District, there's like, I think 3 different murals right around me that have like the Urban Artworks logo as like a collaboration. So I was so excited. Cool. I know, I was so excited to talk to you because I see your organization's work every day. So
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I wish you so much luck on your future as an artist. And yeah. Thanks for chatting with us.
Thank you.
Join us next time when we talk about another artistic inspiration of one of the TAP hosts.